Well, good evening and welcome to our Sunday with Survivors program with Holocaust survivor Judith Steel. My name is Thorin Tritter. I am the Museum and Programming Director at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, which is located in Glen Cove, New York. Before we get to our program this evening, I want to let you know, as the little message on the screen says, we are going to be recording this program. And so if you would like to not be visible, you can always just turn off your camera. I also want, as usual, to put in a plug for some of our upcoming programs. And I wanted to mention in particular that I'll be back for my next Curator's Corner, my short programs where I explore a particular object or image in our collection. I'll be back for my next program next Wednesday, when I'll be talking about, this coming Wednesday, when I'll be talking about an April 1937 issue of Der Stürmer, the anti-Semitic newspaper that was widely circulated in Germany in the 1930s, and which conveys some of the stereotypes and propaganda about Jews that was disseminated in Nazi Germany. On Tuesday, April 19th, that's the following Tuesday, we will have the first program in a new 4-part spring series that we are launching, entitled Laughing at Ourselves, Humor and the Immigrant and Minority Experience. This first program will be with Chinese-American comedian Jocelyn Chia, who will share how she weaves her own immigrant story into her comedy. And one last program to mention, a large program that we've been building up to actually for several months. On April 20th at 8 p.m., HMTC is helping to organize a concert at Carnegie Hall in person that will include the world premiere of Michel Assael's Auschwitz symphonic poem, written in Salonika in 1948, but never before performed, and specifically about a reflection on the Holocaust in a musical way. So I hope you'll join us at Carnegie Hall. You can find information about these and all our upcoming programs and information about how to buy tickets for the Carnegie Hall concert on our website at www.hmtcli.org, and then click on the events tab. Okay, so those are my advertisements. Let me put that away. I would like to introduce our program, or start our program by introducing the man who's behind the Sunday with Survivor program, and that is Michael Mantel. Michael is a 3G whose 2 of his grandparents are survivors, and they instilled in him the need to not let the history of the Holocaust be forgotten. And Michael has kindly, for more than a year, been joining me and helping to arrange these programs and organize these programs to share the stories of survivors that are still around with us. We've also, since starting this program, launched the 2G Tuesday program, providing a forum where the children of survivors can share their family stories. And I'm very grateful for his continued support and the support of his family. So Michael, let me pass it over to you and ask you to lead us into our program.
Thank you so much, Thorin, as always. And I guess they say, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? By supporting the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center and seeing an incredible Yom HaShoah event. So I'm looking forward to that on April 20th. So thank you, Thorin, and for everyone at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center for all the wonderful work that you do every single day, and for making programs like Sundays with Survivors and 2G Tuesdays the success that they are. I want to thank everyone also for being here today. It's so nice to continuously see familiar faces, but also see new people joining. So thank you everyone for being here. A very special thank you to all of the survivors who share their testimonies with us, especially today's guest, Judith Steel. Welcome to Sundays with Survivors. Sundays with Survivors is an online program where Holocaust survivors share their testimonies with people all over the world. It's a time for us to bear witness to their testimonies and reflect. And after the program, a recording will be made available so you can rewatch it and continue to share Judith's testimony with others. Today, Judith will share information about her family's departure from Germany on the SS St. Louis when Judith was an infant, and their forced return to Europe and their subsequent internment in Gurs. She will also talk about her father's successful effort to sneak her into hiding with a Catholic family enabling her to survive. The story of the SS St. Louis, a ship that set sail from Hamburg, Germany to Havana, Cuba in May 1939, with 937 passengers, mostly German Jewish refugees, reminds us that the Holocaust did not happen because of one man's actions. It was able to happen in a world of indifference, inaction, complicity, hate, and anti-Semitism. The story also highlights how courageous acts of many, including the captain, Gustav Schroeder, can instill hope and save lives, and the importance of upstanders in our world. This month, we observe Yom HaShoah, which commemorates the 6 million Jews and millions of other victims murdered in the Holocaust, and the heroism of survivors and rescuers. 1 week later is Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism. During the 19th and 20th centuries, the so-called Jewish question was asked: what in the world does the world do with the world's Jews? The question itself is problematic and underscores not the problem of the Jews, but the presence of anti-Semitic prejudice and Jew hatred. In the 20th and 21st centuries, a new Jewish question is being asked: what do we do with the state of Israel? This question too underscores anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism prejudice, and Jew hatred. Sir Ehrlich answers the question well in a 4-lined poem titled 1 Week Apart. It reads, 2 Memorial Days each year, we calculate the sum, the price of having our own state and the price of having none. If the state of Israel was around, the fate of the Jews, including the passengers of the St. Louis, would have been very different. In just a moment, Judith will share her testimony with us. At the end of the program, we will have time for your questions. You may raise your hand or use the raised hand emoji and wait for us to call on you, or you can write your questions and comments in the chat box, and Thorin and I can read them for you. One more thing, please save the date for our next 2G Tuesdays program, scheduled for Tuesday, May 24th at 6 p.m., when Dinah Kramer presents the story of her mother, Sarah Gold. Again, thank you all so much for being here, and welcome Judith Steel.
Good evening, and thank you for having me this evening. I'm very honored to be your so-called special guest. I'd like to start off my talk with an imaginary letter that I probably would have written to my parents. And it goes like this. Dear Mom and Dad, it's difficult to imagine the anguish that you must have gone through after having to give me up on that evening in September of 1942, when you knew you were going to be taken on a train to Auschwitz, to an unknown fate the following day. I know now the strength you must have had when you took me to the Osea that night before and left me there to live. The honor of not knowing, the horror of not knowing what was going to happen to Opa, to me, or for that matter, to you. I, as a little girl of 4, couldn't imagine, and all I wanted was for you to come back to me. Life would have been so perfect for all of us. I understand now how much you loved me and how much courage it took for you to give me up. Dad, I remember how you were distracting me for a second and letting go of my hand and leaving. It was in that split second that my life changed forever. I waited in vain for you to return to me. And Maman Suzy was there for me and dried my tears. I never stopped waiting for you and Mom and prayed every day for you to come back to me. I never recognized the emptiness that I had been feeling in my life without you, as well as the unexplained rage. This is why I'm finally writing this book. I believe that I am doing this to understand myself better, as well as getting in touch with that part of me which has been in pain and empty all my life. I used to ask myself, how did they go on the train? Did they get a seat? Did they actually get to Auschwitz? I hope they didn't suffer. What were they saying? What were they thinking? Did they worry about me? Probably. But what about the lineup? Who goes where? Did they stay together in the end? I hope so. Holding hands and lovingly gazing at each other. I asked myself, how come I lived and they did not? Writing this to you now, my beloved Mom and Dad, I understand a little bit more about myself. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your great wisdom, the wisdom to make sure that your message will carry on through me, through my children, my 4 grandchildren, as well as future generations. To educate my children and grandchildren as all parents should do, to make sure that the Holocaust will never happen again. God was there to see that I survived, to tell my own story of survival, and impart my experiences for the sake of peace for all future generations. Everyone in the world should visit Poland and the camps to see firsthand what happened and to know that these atrocities actually happened. I truly feel that all parents, no matter what race, creed, or color, should educate their children about this horrible time in history. I love you forever, your Poopy. So the beginning starts, well, I guess before I was born. I was born in February of 1938. There were beatings of Jews and the infamous Kristallnacht, or the night of falling glass. This happened on November 9th and 10th of 1938, when the Nazis vandalized Jewish homes and businesses, torched synagogues, and killed nearly 100 Jews. Some 30,000 Jewish men were arrested, including my father, and he was sent to Nazi concentration camp number 7, Fresnes-sur-Sarthe, in the northwest part of France. After 2 weeks, he was informed that he would be released on the condition that he leaves Germany within 8 weeks, or he and his family would be arrested. After the war, the camp Fresnes-sur-Sarthe was destroyed and rebuilt and made into a famous resort and tourist attraction. I was 14 months old when my parents and my grandfather managed to book passage on the luxury ship, the SS St. Louis, bound for Havana, Cuba. Aboard the ship, they felt safe and secure, not knowing that the St. Louis was to become a big prison. My parents' world was quickly changing. The ship stayed for 10 days in Havana Harbor, and only 22 souls disembarked. According to government officials, our visas were invalid and we were turned away. We tried to enter Miami, but again, we were told to move on because we were in violation of the United States territory, according to the US State Department. We tried other countries, including Canada, When we asked the Minister of Immigration in Canada if he could accept at least some of the passengers, he replied, "None is too many." The ship finally returned to Europe and was allowed to port in Antwerp, Belgium. After that, we went to France, where we rented an apartment in a town called Nye in the Pyrenees. We stayed together until September 9th of 1942. Early one morning, or perhaps the middle of the night, there was a knock on our door. It was the Vichy police coming to arrest us. Why did they come to arrest us? Because we were Jewish. I remember my grandfather was in his bed crying uncontrollably. At that time, I didn't understand. I was only 4 years old. I tried to console him as a 4-year-old child could. I said goodbye to him and went with my parents. I recall seeing my mom whisper something to our landlady, whom later I called Mama. I wondered, what did my mother say to her? What could she have said? We were taken to a detention camp in the south of France called Gurs. There, I remember soldiers standing with machine guns. After that, we moved on to another camp called Rivesaltes. One day in Rivesaltes, my mother was playing with me, and I cannot forget the sadness in her eyes when she said casually, "Judy, Mommy and Daddy have to go away, and we don't know when we will be back." Of course, a child cannot understand this, and I just wanted to play. As we played, the sadness in her eyes remained. Later that day, my father said, "Judy, let's take a walk." "Okay," I replied. And my mother gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and cheerfully told us, "Have a good time." She gave me a quick kiss, actually meaning goodbye. My dad and I walked into the darkness until we came to a lit room where someone greeted us. They gave me something warm and sweet to drink. Maybe it was hot chocolate. I held my dad's hand with my left hand. He pointed to my right side in order to distract me. "Look over there, Judy." And I looked. And I heard him say, "Just a minute, Judy." And he let go of my hand. My hand was picked up again. And when I turned around, someone else had picked up my hand. My father was gone, and I never saw him or my mother again. It was in that instant that my life changed forever. The next morning, I woke up to find the Rivesaltes barracks empty. Maman's husband came for me and brought me back to his house. All the prisoners were put into trains to Drancy and then to Auschwitz. I was covered with sores. Maman had to douse the sores with iodine. I do remember screaming from the sting of the medication. Maman brought me to a doctor to look me over, and he said that I suffered from malnutrition and he wasn't sure if I could survive. I believe Maman's loving, healing hands made me survive. I loved hearing Maman sing to me in different languages. I tried to imitate her, and I strived to be just as beautiful as Maman. As she attended to my sores, dabbing them with iodine, she was also healing my broken heart by loving me unconditionally. Soon I became a little French girl who went to school and to church. I sang hymns and made signs of the cross. It was wonderful to be a part of a family that made me feel safe and loved. From time to time, I would ask my mom, "When are my mom and dad coming back?" There was no answer. I remember one day in particular in 1945, when I was wheeling my maman's toddler son, Jacques, in his carriage down Côte Saint-Martin. We were heading towards the center of town when suddenly I heard gunshots. We ran for cover into a jewelry store that was near the house. Maman came running after us, taking us back to her house for safety. We stayed in the house for a few hours. When the gunshots subsided, I decided to go back out and play. However, I was chased back by another loud shot. I never ran so fast in my life. The next day, our home and furniture factory were taken over by the Nazis. Maman feared that they would discover that I was Jewish because I had a German accent. Therefore, Maman made sure that I was dressed like a little French girl and told me not to speak, since she feared that I would give myself away. I would only smile, and I didn't utter a word. One soldier told me that I was so pretty, just like my Maman. It made me very happy because she was very beautiful. What a compliment for a 7-year-old child. I said, "You see, you really are my Maman." The war ended in 1945, and I had to leave the home I was loved in for 4.5 years. I stayed there for another 1.5 years. Then the time came when Maman had to take me to Paris, to the OSE headquarters. The OSE saved many children during the war, but I wanted them to leave me with Maman. On the day that I left with Maman, it was dark and rainy. I remember that very well. She took me to the OSE. I was so young and I wasn't aware of the danger that Maman's family took on by keeping me as their little French girl. I didn't know the Nazis would have killed me because I was Jewish, and they would have killed Maman and her family for hiding me. When we got to the office of the OSE, Maman told me she had to leave me there. The news made all my fears of abandonment and rage resurface. It was the same feeling of my father giving me away 4.5 years earlier. I begged Maman not to leave me, and it took 3 people to pry me away from her. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Please, Maman, don't go." The pain of it was starting all over again. That next day, I was taken to an orphanage called Villa des Glycines, where I stayed with other war orphans until the OSE was able to book me on a ship to America. I was told that I would live with my aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins, and they were very rich. I also learned that in America, the streets were paved with gold. Through all this, I kept a hope that Mama would come get me. Years later, she told me I could not stop crying and felt her heart breaking that day, and life was never the same for her. It was many years later that Maman told me this, because I was not in touch with her for a long time. In August of 1946, I finally boarded the Atos 2 that was bound for America. I was not happy. I caught some lice from the orphanage, and I feared that I would be thrown away like bad merchandise by my aunt and uncle. I remember going to the ship's railing and trying to shake my head very hard, every which way, to get rid of the lice in my hair. Of course, it wasn't possible. I found out years later that my aunt and uncle took me to a doctor to get rid of the lice with medication. When we arrived on the New York harbor on September 9th, 1946, I was dazzled by the beautiful neon lights. Then learned there was a dock strike, and once again, no one was allowed to leave the ship, like a déjà vu. However, the president who interceded on behalf of the 68 orphans ordered a ferry boat to take us to shore. I was greeted by my aunt and uncle and their 2 children, who became my new parents and brothers. They didn't realize the heavy burden set upon me. I only spoke, read, and wrote in French, and they spoke only in English and German. Therefore, there was no communication. I had to give up my French books, and I wasn't allowed to write or speak in French. This traumatic experience caused me to have various periods of depression, isolation, rage, and abandonment, with no one to speak about it. I was hoping and praying that my parents were still alive so that they could come and get me. It seemed like I waited for them forever. When I finally found out what happened to them, it was my aunt who told me they died in Auschwitz by gas. I lived in New York City in the 1960s with my husband. I was very much alone. I had already lost so much. I had been uprooted from my birthplace in Germany and then France. I had lost my mother and father to the concentration camps. I had lost my grandfather, and I lost my second mother, Maman, when I came to America. I lost my confidence, and I lost my faith in God. I was encouraged by a friend to play the guitar and to buy a guitar and to play it, and began experimenting with my voice. Through singing, I started to connect my head to my heart, my breath to my soul. It felt very good to me. I taught myself many songs with my guitar, and I was especially drawn to songs in different languages. I especially became attracted to Hasidic music and songs from the liturgy. I eventually met my first agent, who auditioned me in her home in front of her family and friends. She sent me out on singing jobs at various synagogues and different organizations, and I started to share my Holocaust story. I performed and spoke in many places in this country and in Canada. I was inspired by a friend to meditate and met my first guru. It was then that I had a conflict with my spirituality and my religion. As fate had it, I met my rabbi, who spoke many times in the ashram. I heard he was going to be in Central Park, and I was anxious to meet this rabbi since I had guilt feelings, and I wanted to keep my Jewishness to honor my mother and father. He performed a Shabbat service and also said the things that my guru would have said. Therefore, I felt in harmony with his teachings, never instead of, always in addition to. I had the opportunity of chanting with his group, and he came up to me and said, "I like your voice." I thanked him, and he invited me to come to chant the wonderful songs I taught myself and the songs he taught me. He started calling me to attend his functions, and with his encouragement, I was privileged to assist him. I assisted him at his seminary and took his course, and he ordained me as an interfaith minister. and I performed many wedding ceremonies, baby namings, funerals, etc. In 1985, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and the doctor performed a complete mastectomy. The pain I felt was excruciating. A friend came to visit me in the hospital and put her hands on my shoulder where all the pain was. 5 minutes later, she left and I felt the pain leaving my shoulders. This was my first experience with Reiki, a universal life force energy that can heal the spiritual, the physical, and the emotional. I was initiated by her teacher and received all 3 attunements. And after taking Reiki 3, that was the master's degree, I was able to teach Reiki, practice healing, and attune my students. The healing is not curing. Healing is the healing of the soul. On Sunday of 1994, I had the privilege of marching in the Israeli Day Parade as one of the child survivors of the Holocaust. We were celebrating the 50th anniversary of Israel. As we were waiting to march, there was a commotion, and I turned to see a man in a wheelchair being treated with great joy by many people. He was the president of the organization, and although he had major surgery, his smile through his obvious pain drew me to his side. I introduced myself and extended my hand to him. I said, "I'm very honored to be here today. I was a passenger on the SS St. Louis with my parents." He in turn told me he was hidden in southern France. I said, "Me too." Then he asked me, "When did you come to America?" I said, "In 1946. He said, "Me too." I said, "On a ship at those deux." He said, "Me too." I said, "In September, there were 68 orphans." He said, "I was there too." We were 2 of the 68 orphans that arrived on that ship 50 years ago. He said, "I had boils on my skin. I had lice in my hair," I said. He told me he had cancer. I said, "I'm a cancer survivor." When he mentioned he was looking into alternative healing, I blinked in disbelief. I'm a Reiki healer. Reiki is an ancient healing modality rediscovered by a doctor in Japan. "Are you in pain?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "in my legs." "Let's see what I can do." I began the healing, and we both reflected and were amazed by the similarities in our lives. When the healing session was over, I asked him if it helped. He smiled at me and said, "I don't feel any pain." Then it was time to march in the parade. Later on, I received a phone call from this man and his wife, and they invited me to come to the house to do more healing. The healing brought him joy. It brought him peace. And it didn't save his life, but he was happy in spite of the pain that he was having. In 1991, I was invited to go to a hidden children's conference at the Marriott Hotel in Manhattan. This to me turned out to be a life-changing experience. Hearing the speakers on the first day touched the deepest part of my heart and soul and brought tears to my eyes. I was able to identify with so much, and that was said as if they were speaking directly to me. On the second day, there was a luncheon with speakers that again tugged at my heartstrings. They had brought 22 people from Poland and France who had hidden Jews during the war, risking their own lives so that they may live. I cried again like a baby. I felt that my sweet maman should have been on that stage with these amazing saviors. It was then that an old longing to see maman once more before it's too late. After saying a prayer and asking for courage, I dialed her telephone number, which was given to me by her granddaughter, and heard her voice saying, "Hello," on the other side. In my broken French, I responded, "Maman, c'est Judith." She answered, "My little one, it's you." There was a mixture of joy and tears. I asked her if I could come to visit her in France, and she immediately responded, "Yes, my darling, come." In March of 1991, I set off to reunite with Maman. There was instant recognition and tears of joy and hugs and kisses. Her eyes had sadness from the moment I had to leave her 46 years ago until now. She brought out a bottle of champagne to celebrate this joyful reunion. I told her how grateful I was for her saving my life and risking her life for me. And she answered, "It was the Christian thing to do. I could have never survived without her love." I made many trips of forgiveness, one of them being my trip to Poland and visiting Auschwitz, where my parents died. Before entering Auschwitz, we visited a Jewish cemetery that had been desecrated. It was heartwarming to see so many students of so many races, creeds, and colors taking shovels and working to erect the gravestones and fixing the graves that had been vandalized. What a sight this was. After following, I would like to read a poem that was written by my friend David Rothblatt. It's called Auschwitz. In this mournful place, the somber one to see, the truly saddened space of anguished memory. What is the reason for this keep? No one will ever know, but children's tears and widows weep makes the flowers grow. That loved ones lie forever in sorrow beneath this earth, drenched in pain with the flood of tears, the flowers are their only worth. The wind blows quietly in this place and seems a gentle sigh, but it's children's tears and widows weep and the sound of their soulful cry. In the beginning of 1989, I received an invitation for a reunion of the SS St. Louis. It was to be the first one of its kind and raised my curiosity. Who were my other shipmates? Where were they from? This was an idea of Mr. Herbert Carliner, another St. Louis survivor from Miami. Unlike me, Herbert had many pre-war memories. After all the trauma, his outlook on life remained so positive and so joyous. He is a great example of real heroism of a true teacher. We have much to learn to be around him and his beautiful wife, Vera. On that weekend, we exchanged many photographs and stories, and mine was the least since I was the youngest. However, I couldn't help but feel a special camaraderie or kinship with everyone as part of my own family. We share something interesting and something unique. We were at the same time, at the same place, and it was amazing. On another one of our trips of forgiveness, we were invited to Washington, D.C., so that the State Department could apologize for chasing the ship out of U.S. territories. In October of 2018, when we visited Canada, we were invited by the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa to hear an apology from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He greeted each of the survivors at a reception that was given in Parliament. He was very gracious. We were invited to Florida, Cuba, Hamburg, Germany, and Israel. They were very emotional trips. In Hamburg, we were given a reception by German Christians asking our forgiveness for what their mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandparents, great-grandparents did during the Holocaust. They showed great remorse, and we had to accept their apology. After that, we flew to Israel, where we were visited Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem. It was there that I visited the Garden of the Righteous and saw the names of Maman, Papa, and Na on a large marble slab. As I reflect on my life, all 84 years of it, I feel that it is like a big jigsaw puzzle finally fitting into place. For so many years, there have been so many questions. Why am I here and why are they not? As my career started developing, I was given the answers. Destiny made it so for me to live to tell my story. As I stand in a classroom full of students, most of them non-Jewish, I see in their faces a dream of a better tomorrow. I feel impressed with the depth of some of their questions, how straightforward they are, and how anxious they are to learn. What started for me as a singing career has become so much more. One of the students, a young man, came up to me and asked me to speak at his church. His eyes showed great sincerity, and I immediately said yes. Others came up to me to thank me for sharing that part of my life and express that they were glad that I was alive. I'd like to open the floor now for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Judith, for sharing that your story and for sharing so much personal information about you. So thank you. I'm sure a number of people have questions, and I'll just encourage them, as you have, to, as Michael said, either you can raise your hand physically or electronically, or write a question in the chat window. And maybe I'll get us started just by asking you a little more about your French mother, Maman. And you said she was recognized by Yad Vashem, is that right? As one of the righteous among the nations. How did that happen? Were you involved in that process?
Yes, I was. It's getting me a little verklempt, but because it brings back a lot of good memories. How when I went to the reunion, and there were 22 rescuers there, I just decided that Maman had to be there too. And I just felt that she needed recognition. And I went, it was a process, you know. After going to France, I met somebody from Israel, and they said I had to write letters in triplicate, and I'm not good at writing one letter. So we wrote that. And getting all the information together with the witnesses who knew Maman in those days, Not that there were that many, but this is many years later. But we were able to get together names and witnesses, and the Ose wrote a letter, and I had a letter by a rabbi, and it took a while. It took about a year, and finally we got all the information, and they wanted my mom to come to Israel, but my mom wasn't well, and she said, I can't make it. So they actually came to her town, in the town hall, where she was honored. And there were many people there, and my mom's niece was not, the niece or granddaughter was there. And it was a wonderful reunion. I actually had a teacher there from my second grade that was there, Madame Superbiel. And it was really quite a reunion, and I just feel that I accomplished something just to get her name on that slab in Yad Vashem. It was really quite a experience for me.
You said she had explained her willingness to put her life at risk as something. It was the Christian thing to do. Did she ever talk more about what made her decide to risk so much?
She was full of love. I wrote a book called Love Brought Me Through the Holocaust. It was love that brought me to her house, and her love that kept me alive for all these years that I was with her.
Thank you. I know there's some other questions coming in. Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. I shared the link to Amazon for your book, and Judith, thank you so much for sharing that. It was an incredible journey to join you on. Speaking of the title of this book, I was wondering, because you speak with such poise and beauty, and you have such a strong spiritual connection, and you wrote a book called Love Brought Me Through the Holocaust, and for all you went through, how did you come to this place of love and healing? I know you mentioned a friend introducing you to the guitar in your path there, but how did you come there spiritually, emotionally, and personally?
I was brought up because of love. I was saved because of love. My parents gave me up because of love. I'm not sure I'm answering your question right, but this was what came to my mind. Love brought me through the Holocaust.
Thank you. I don't think there's any wrong way to answer that, and I think you answered it beautifully. I think a lot of people share that love brings them through this hope, love. Speaking of, there was a beautiful comment. Thank you for sharing. It was an emotionally painful to share your testimony. Thank you for your time. This is a precious gift for all of us. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. I just wanted to share that comment that was made. And
thank you. Yeah, they say that love is God, God is love. I was for a long time, I was not an atheist, but I just was doubting that there was a God, and I had to be shown. And I just feel that God is love. That God brought me through the Holocaust.
thank you. There's another question, speaking of atheism, another statement. Thank you for sharing your story. One question, did you always remember that you were Jewish, or were you informed when you were older? And what has been your path with Judaism after being raised and hidden as a Christian? It's a great question.
With all, I was raised as a Christian. However, I was never for one moment told that I was going to be Christian. They never tried to change my religion, just out of respect. Enjoyed the Easter and the Christmas trees, but they, out of respect for my parents, would never have tried to change my religion, convert me.
I think that's wonderful. We hear a lot about these stories where there is an attempt to save a child's soul. And so the fact that you had these people who didn't do that, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
There's another question about how you, I guess we're all kind of feeling this love through you. And again, the title of your book. So there was another question of how you fought feelings. You mentioned of anger. So with anger or bitterness, et cetera, how did you fight through that?
It was difficult at first. As I mentioned in the book, there was no one to talk to about my feelings, and they definitely did come up, and I felt them through my whole body. It was very difficult in the beginning. I didn't start any kind of therapy until after I got married. My poor husband at the time had to put up with a lot of my mishigas, but thank God with the proper people in my life and meeting my rabbi for the first time, this to me was a very important time. And learning how to meditate was very healing for me.
Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I think there is a question from Diane. I'm not sure. Diane, do you feel comfortable sharing the question, or we can ask it for you?
Yeah, I will. Well, first, you mentioned your teacher was there when your mama was honored, and I'm wondering, did your teachers know that you were Jewish? That's one question.
Good question. I think they did. Yeah.
Okay, and the other question is, my grandfather escaped from Poland, and he would never discuss the details of anything, the loss of his family with my mom, with his family. I was just wondering what your journey was with your own children and passing it on.
I feel this way for myself, that it's important to share it it's important for me to share it with my family, and I have grandchildren, I have a great grandson, and I never kept any secrets from them. It was, sometimes they got annoyed at me, but I think as we went on, they started to understand. Especially if you would see the what they wrote in the book, you have to forgive me because I suffered a stroke, and it makes me lose my words sometimes. So excuse me. Okay, the forward. They wrote the forward, and the two of them, what they wrote in there, you have to see it yourself. If you take a glance at it, they truly understand me as a person, as a survivor, and I think there's a certain amount of respect there too. Sometimes.
Thank you. You're beautiful, by the way. in and out.
Thanks.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Diane, for that question. That was actually, now I'm remembering, that was my question that I wanted to ask you about how you came to share this, your story, but also being that you were so young at the time, how did you learn your story? How did the kind of the details, for example, with your father, are those things that you remembered? Did someone share some of these details with you after as well?
I mean, I remember when my father, took me to the Ose. I remember quite a bit. I was 4 years old, but I was when something as traumatic happens to a child, they remember these things. At least this is what happened to me. I remember being in Gurs and seeing the men, the soldiers with machine guns. And I don't remember what my mother said they were. She might have said that they're to protect you. They kept me from being, frightened all the time. And I remember in Revesalt, where there were long houses and there were children there. And I remember one family in particular. I mean, these are things that are still in my mind. I was told about the St. Louis. I mean, I was 14 months old when I boarded the St. Louis. So the St. Louis was because of the St. Louis that my parents were killed. I relate to that, but I was never. I don't remember the ship at all, obviously. What else?
So there's two questions. One about if you can share a little bit about your American relatives who raised you after your arrival in the U.S., what their experience with you joining the family was like. We'll start with that one as the first question.
Well, it took a lot of courage for them to take me in the home. This was my aunt and uncle. My uncle was my father's brother. And it must have been just as difficult for them as it was for me, to get acquainted, to not speak the same language. It was my aunt's feeling that I should stop speaking French. So she took away the books and anybody, I wasn't allowed to speak French to anyone, only English and German, which I didn't know. I didn't speak either one. So we had a hard time. It was, I don't blame them so much as like I used to, as a child. I was very, very unhappy. But I understand now a lot of the things were supposedly for my own good, whatever. For instance, I couldn't write in French to my French mom. And I remember having written a letter and putting it, wherever the mail was supposed to go. And she took the letter and ripped it up. And she said, you're not writing anymore, So she felt she was doing the right thing, That's all I can say about that.
And you attended these Hidden Children's Conference, the SS St. Louis reunion. Were you able to stay in touch with a number of these survivors? Has there been any gatherings since then and staying in touch with their families?
Oh, yes. We sort of bonded, not everybody together, but, individually. And as a matter of fact, I just spoke to one of the St. Louis survivors today. She had had major surgery, and we were sort of commiserating. And it's nice to know them. This is one woman who was even younger than I was on the St. Louis. Yeah, she was 9 months and I was 14 months.
Wow. Was she the youngest, did you say?
I think she was the youngest, yes.
And one last question, and then I'll pass it to Thorin after. Someone asked, was your husband a survivor as well? How did you meet him? And was it hard being in the relationship and feeling secure in a relationship after all you've been through?
Was my husband a survivor? He survived me. Our relationship was, well, you know, when you're young, you're in love and so on. As we got older, as we got into the marriage, there wasn't much communication, and I felt lost. And I was very depressed, and it led to our divorce. But we're friends now.
Judith, thank you so much for sharing so much with us this evening. And I will say I find your story inspirational. To go through so much trauma, and you describe it with such power. And yet to hear you also talk about where you are now and to write a book about love coming out of this, it's really an impressive journey, and I really believe a powerful message to all of us. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Michael, thank you for your help with this, and for all of you who are watching, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope to see you all at some of our other upcoming programs soon.
Thank you so much, Thorin, Judith, and everyone for being here.
Have a good evening, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.